Hi, Jim here, and you're listening to the Honest Filmmaker podcast. My guest this week is director Carl Tibbetts. Carl's debut feature, Retreat, stars Cillian Murphy, Thandie Newton, and Jamie Bell, and he then went on to direct 2 monumental episodes of Black Mirror. Since then, he's been a regular on big TV shows like Hemlock, Humans, The Lazarus Project, and True Love. I chatted to Carl about his career, how he got that film as his first feature film with those big stars in, how he then moved into television and got to work on Black Mirror, and we also talked about his advice for new people to the industry who want to direct television. Enjoy. So let's start at the beginning. So if I look, and I know IMDb isn't always where the true story is, but if I look at your IMDb, it starts with an editing a short film, and then suddenly you're writing and directing a feature. So wind me back from that. Did you go to film school, uni? How did you get from that, whatever that was, to directing and writing a feature film?
I applied for a job in London as an assistant editor off the back of Broadcast magazine. Landed an interview, didn't live in London at the time, just had my friend's address, got the job, found myself being runner, tape assistant editor in a post-production house in central London. And that just sort of put me into London and sort of paid me some money while I was trying desperately to kind of get short films made and just pursue this whole idea of directing and writing. And basically, I kind of had several jobs in post-production. I moved around quite a lot to support myself, tried to raise finance for short films, never did, made a few of them on my own, which were a great film school, but I don't think anything of any value came out of it other than, my time and education in it, and then eventually what happened is the sort of digital age happened where instead of having to make short films, you could suddenly probably make a feature film like for the same price, if you were clever about what you were writing and how you approached it. And so I came up with the idea and wrote a screenplay for a film called Retreat, and that was like a self-contained 3-hander with a high concept behind it, and I sort of wrote a few drafts of that, and it was sort of coming together. And then I got some advice from a producer who said to me, "You need to find a playwright to kind of like work with on this." And that's when novelist now Janice Hallett kind of appeared on my radar, and I sent her the script, and she did this fantastic draft, and we collaborated on that for a year or so, kind of like getting it into a really good place. And she's a great writer. She's got, now she's a sort of Times best-selling crime novelist. At the time she was writing kind of local theatre and stuff. So, but she's great. She's very talented, and she always was even back then. And and then I found a producer. Someone came to me. I was looking for a producer, and somebody said, "There's this producer called Gary Signor, and he's looking for feature films to but thrillers." And he'd done, and I looked him up, and what he'd done is a lot of quite broad comedies. So I was a bit like, not sure, but like I met him, he read it. I sort of sent it to him, he read it. Overnight, he called me back and said, "This is great, I'd like to meet." We met. He was like, "Yeah, I've done comedies, but I've always wanted to make a thriller." He did go on and make one of his own, I think called Unseen, years later. But, it was sort of his ambition to do it. And really it was Gary's sort of tenacity and guile that really sort of pushed it forward and got it made. He really did kind of go out to bat for it, and made the difference, went the extra mile and made the difference for a first-time director. There were several occasions, several meetings where it was like, we love the script, but, we don't want the director because he hasn't done anything, and I just kind of clung on to it, and Gary clung on to it with me and supported me. And I think the tide really began to turn on it once we cast. I think the first person we cast was Thandie Newton. Thandie Newton, isn't it? And she changed her name quite recently. But it was Thandie, and it was Cillian, and then I think it was Jamie that came on. And I think once we'd cast those, once they kind of expressed interest in the project and they were on, people couldn't just keep saying no to it. They didn't give us the most amount of money in the world, but people just couldn't keep sort of saying no to it. And, when you're a proper first-time director and, you've written a 3-hander, quite an intense, emotional three-hander that's going to be shot in one location over 4 weeks, it's quite a baptism of fire. I think that was how I described it at the time, and how I still describe it now, really, it was definitely a vast learning curve, for better or worse. We made the film, and it's a good film. It's a good first sort of step. I think to into the world, and a vast education. Working with those experienced actors was amazing. And really off the back of that, I sort of started to sort of develop other ideas and scripts, and wasn't particularly hugely interested in going into television hugely at that time. But Black Mirror came my way. I think Annabelle had seen Retreat. I think my agent had sent it and seen Retreat. And at the time, the episode that I first did, White Bear, was going to be a contained thriller horror thing. And they were looking for directors, I presume, who had done sort of recent contained thrillers. I don't know if Charlie had actually seen it at the time that I met him, but Annabelle had, and they really liked the film, and I kind of that was the next thing that I ended up doing. In between Retreat and Black Mirror, I developed several other screenplays and projects and treatments. As you do as a sort of writer director, but getting them past that stage is always the difficulty. And so what I did when I went to do kind of White Bear was a very, everything I'd learned, or I felt that I hadn't got quite right with Retreat, I sort of put into White Bear, into Black Mirror, into White Bear, and kind of made sure that I sort of took all of the education of Retreat and put it into this opportunity, which was, essentially, a 40-odd minute film, because it's standalone, and again, a thriller, and just put everything I could into it, and that's sort of, I guess, how I started.
Wowzers. So that's, yeah. So IMDb does not give you the full story.
No.
And just to pick up on a couple of things you said there, the starting with that video shop, I remember that vividly. Going into the video shop was amazing experience. I feel like I go into HMV now to try and relive that experience. That's why I end up buying DVDs, because I want to touch.
I've still got a vast DVD collection. I really love the physical thing, and I do go into those places. I still buy records. I'm a big music fan still, so I buy vinyl as well. I love CDs. I guess my generation was the CD more than vinyl, but I buy more vinyl now than I did in the 90s.
Yeah,
but with DVDs, DVDs and Blu-rays, I will always go for them, because the extras, the extras were always fantastic, and there's, it's great to have them. I'm still a believer in sort of having your culture on display,
Yeah, and having been through that with the DVDs, and then finding out some films aren't available anywhere now.
I know.
It's nuts. It's crazy that you can't.
It's completely nuts. They've got such a sort of hold on that, and what they're buying, what they're not buying, and stuff. Yeah. It's it's a shame, because I don't think people get a full education. When directors put out those those lists of their favourite movies, unless you're studying film, you probably don't really have access to it. Because I remember, when I was at university, I literally, they give you this fantastic list, this great study list. I've still got that list. You know what I mean? I sort of keep that list, and I made sure that I remember when I left university, actually, I tried to record all these films that I was never going to see again, because I thought I'm never going to see them again. And I had all these VHSs of these sort of films, and and then obviously everything's gone. You can get everything elsewhere, but I thought I'm never going to get access to that again. And obviously I did get access to most of it, but some of it is gone. Some of it is completely gone.
Yeah, it's nuts, isn't it? I had a similar experience going to uni, studying film, and just eyes open to all this new cinema that you didn't even know existed, because you'd only been exposed to kind of mainstream stuff. The other thing I was going to ask you about, just to pick up from that, was you got the playwright / writer on board with Retreat. What would you say was the noticeable difference in the versions that she was working on the draft? How did it improve? And because that's something no one's not spoken to someone who's done that before, who's got somebody else in who's kind of made a noticeable difference. So what do you think the noticeable difference was?
I guess just more of that sensibility, that ability to be economical, sort of focus the thrills, I guess, really focus the story down a little bit, and it's that skill set. Often films bring on writers because they're good at action, or they're good at dialogue, or they'll get this guy to do this pass because they're good at this, or she's good at that, and it's sort of, and I guess there was an element of that, it's like this idea that, well, you can handle, the intensity of sort of three people locked in a room together. We sort of, she did a very, very good pass on it, and we smashed it backwards and forwards for quite a long time, sort of mixing our sensibilities. Sensibilities are always slightly different. I think Janice was always slightly broader than mine. I was always sort of, because of my sort of fine background, I was sort of always trying to go to the edges, and she was sort of always bringing it back to the middle, which I think actually ended up working really well for it. Sort of the place it ended up, or the script did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then looking at the projects you worked on, so you've done a lot of TV, a lot of big TV shows where you come in and do like a couple of episodes here and there. Yeah. What's that like? And are you, with those TV shows, do you pitch? How does it work? Do you go in, they go, we need someone to direct these 2 episodes, and then you have to kind of read the episodes and pitch them? Or does the agent
sometimes? Well, what happens is, it all comes through my agent generally, unless I sort of request, or I know the producer or something, it generally kind of goes to my agent, or my agents, all the work goes to these big agencies, Independent is my agent, Jack Thomas is my agent, Independent's the agency, Jack Thomas is my agent, and all of the work generally sort of feeds through them. Unless, like I say, I've got a relationship with the producer who's making it, or know the production company. But generally, it kind of comes through them, and I'll be sent a script, and I'll decide whether I want to meet on it. You do a meet on it, and you talk about it. So I guess there's a pitching element, because some things are out to 10 people, some things are out to 2, some people just want you. So it really does depend on the circumstances. You always meet everybody, obviously, just to make sure everybody is can get on and talk. And they're talking about trying to make the same show, But it's generally that has always been the approach. It really depends, but that is generally the approach. You do go in, I think, go in and pitch. You know what I mean? Quite a lot.
So then I was going to ask you. So you're coming in to do episodes on shows that are, looking at that list, a lot of them are already established. So you've got actors who kind of know that role inside out, and obviously got their own view on it. The story's been written, so you're within a framework. On TV shows like that, how much time do you spend with the actors, and how many discussions do you have? Is it different in your mind to like a feature film, which you might have lots of discussions with? It's
a different skill set that you use. I'll just say it's just quite a different skill set in terms of, if you're walking into an already established show, you're kind of there to, as long as to keep the tone, to understand the story. You've been picked because something else that you've done, is going to resonate with that particular story of those particular episodes. I try and meet or have a conversation with the actors beforehand, just to kind of understand them, where they are, where their head's at, what they think about their character, what they think about the story. And then you're kind of, you're stepping into a sort of already established world. Sometimes you're not setting it up. You're very much a team player. You kind of go into guide it through, and while you are still able to kind of do the shots you want, get your DP, you choose your DP often, you choose your own editor, and you are kind of taking an approach that you want to take, in terms within reason. I always say, it's kind of like, it's still got to sort of fit into the world, but as long as you sort of you understand what the job is, I guess, when you're stepping into that kind of thing. It is a different thing, and you are very much part of a team, to sort of bring a bigger thing in. It's different if you're setting it up. Then you are there to set it up, to create a look, to a style, to cast it, to bring all the kind of main HODs on, and establish a show, really. So that's different. Sometimes second seasons are different to first seasons. If you actually analyse quite a lot of television shows, between series 1 and series 2, they often have a little bit of a different visual style. Certain things, everyone stays away from certain things. As long as you don't go totally off what the show looks like, it's sort of, I don't think that many people sort of watch stuff and go, well, this doesn't look exactly like, season 4. I think there's a sort of an implicit understanding, or, of what the show looks like because of the locations, because of the actors, because of the score, because of the credits. There's like kind of a whole wraparound look of something that where someone's probably not going to pick up on if the camera style might be slightly different.
Do you watch every single episode of something before you work on it?
Yeah, I try to.
Try and get more around.
Yeah, I'm very aware of it, definitely, just to sort of understand their approach. And if something comes to me, I'll sort of read it and then I'll watch the show and I'll decide sort of, if I want to do that or meet on that, yes, it's got to be something I feel like I can do something with. Is there some, I probably could work a little bit more than I do, because I tend to try and pick up stuff that appeals to me in some form or another, yeah.
And so then what would you say makes a good television director?
Well, there's several versions of a good television director. I think, ultimately you've got to be able to sit in a room with 20 other people and know that, you are part of creating this. You're just one part of, if, bringing this thing to life. Your skill set is different to where the writer's skill set is often. It's different to where the producer's skill set is. You just got to sort of find your strengths and slot into where everybody else's work skill set is. People look, and it can be random because sometimes you've got all the control and everyone's looking at you, and then other times you don't. And I think often when different shows have different sort of setups, they have more writer palm or exec palm or director palm, or it just really depends on who you're getting into bed with, and you often don't know. People don't know. You sort of have to adjust to the environment a little bit.
Yeah. So. And then because I was going to go back to Black Mirror, so that was season 2, and I might have this wrong in my head, but I sort of feel like it was kind of season 2 when people started to really notice it and really, the show became huge. So was it huge when you were working on it, and was there pressure, or was it kind of just on the build?
It was the reason I'd seen season 1 and I'd seen the national anthem, and I remember watching the national anthem being like, holy, I'd never seen anything like that, like on television. I just thought that's one of the best pieces of television I've ever seen, directed by a brilliant TV director and director Otto Bathurst, who went on and sort of set up Peaky Blinders. And has done other stuff, very good, and it's a fantastic episode, and I just thought, and that came in and I was like, okay, great, yeah, I'll meet on that because I really like it. And at the time it was, it was a sort of second season, 3rd episode of a little cult show that a few people were talking about, tucked away on Channel 4 at 9 o'clock at night. It had its following, but it was nowhere near what it sort of became, what was interesting is the next one I did, White Christmas, was the one that bridged it to Netflix in America. But at that time, it wasn't that huge, But it became massive. White Bear just sort of blew up, and so did White Christmas. Absolutely blew up everywhere, and sort of I found myself in America for a short period of time because of it.
Yeah, that's a huge show now. It's kind of like one of the tent poles, the Netflix tent pole shows that when it comes out, there's a big deal. So looking back now, and I know this is a difficult one for you, I think, because, and maybe it's like this for everybody, everyone has this kind of unconventional career path into the industry, but what would you wish you'd known at the beginning, and what would be your advice for somebody who's just starting right now?
What would I wish that I had known in the very beginning? I think you very green. When you literally walk off doing a feature film and then you walk into something like Black Mirror, you're sort of finding your feet. You don't really understand maybe where some of the directors have started and where you're starting and how it works, and learn to say kind of no to stuff, I think, as well, and probably yes to some stuff that's maybe uncomfortable, for you to do, or you think, oh, that's not really for me. I think I could be bolder in that sense. But also learning to say sort of no It depends on the pressures on you, because it's like, to be blunt, it depends if you're, if you have to work or if you can choose the work that you do. You will find that people will have very different careers sometimes based around that. Some people love to work. As freelancers, you get into this mindset of like, I've got to work, I've got to find something, I've got to do something, I've got to work. And that can kind of overtake and dominate maybe a bit of the sense of your taste. I think I had a strange way in, but what's interesting is that the industry also changed around that time as well. Because independent cinema in the UK sort of withered on the vine over that period as well, while television went through the roof. So the place really to be was television, and if you wanted to be seen, you were more likely to be seen and recognised by doing a couple of episodes of Humans than you were if you did your independent film that that nobody was seeing or was really hard to get financed or was really difficult. So the profile of TV and TV directors and the talent that's in television, completely changed over that period. So really, it was like the place to work, I guess, and it's how directors get noticed now. Whereas before, there was a kind of like there still is definitely a separation between sort of cinema and television. All the producers anyway, they don't really sort of like connect, or they don't know much about each other's worlds. I think it's changing slightly. There are more film producers coming into television and stuff, but to do the bigger shows. But it's sort of like they don't really mix, and the environment is completely different. Like I say, everyone's hoping that film here will pick up again, and it does need to. And there's some great execs and some great producers and some great writers and some great directors who are trying to do that, trying to kind of get British cinema going again. But really, it's been television. But there is again now at the moment a retraction in television as well. There's a real sort of a real kind of like, not as many productions are going, and there's sort of big shows and little shows, and that's kind of it at the moment. So it's a very interesting environment. But the reasons I stayed in television that period was because it got harder and harder and harder and harder to make a film. And has been.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to end on a positive question, a positive note. So tell me about a moment on set, like one of those pinch me moments where you were like, oh my God, I can't believe this is my job. And you just remember as enjoying.
Do you know what though? Like, there's so many of those because I really enjoy it, and I realise it's a huge privilege. There are moments where it's like, you don't really think, until you sort of sit down for 5 minutes and go, oh shit, this is, there's John Hamm, or, oh shit, there's Charles Dance, or, oh, you kind of not really, it's the privilege to be able to kind of be in flow and be creative and get paid for it and work with really super talented people. There's times when I've sat in edit suites with really talented producers, really talented executives, who really can nail an edit, and you learn huge amounts from that, as much as you do from working with a fantastic DP on something, or a fantastic actor on something, or the sort of privilege and the enjoyment sort of doesn't stop. I'm trying to think of a particular, I'm talking so I can think of a very particular incident where I've thought, oh my God, this is amazing. I'm sure it'll come to me at some point.
Yeah, you'll think of it later. I was thinking what I want is that moment where you're like, I've made it. Do you know what I mean?
I think I've made it. Where was that? When did that happen? I think I'm trying to think when I made Retreat, I was quite nervous about it, I think. And what happened with Retreat was I was very much learning on my feet and dealing very closely with some super talented actors. And I don't think I'll just say, I don't think I kind of like approached it in exactly the way that I wanted to approach it, because I didn't really have the dialogue as a director. I thought like how to communicate this to the whole crew and how to communicate it to the actor. I sort of knew what I wanted out of the performances, but I don't think I communicated really well with the crew in terms of articulating a vision, because I assumed, because I'd written it and everybody had read it, that everybody sort of knew what it was, but they don't. Directing is sort of articulating your vision and super clearly, but sort of having an idea about the sort of atmosphere and tone, that you really want to create with the camera and how to tell that story, and that sounds really obvious, but when you're doing it for the first time, it's not always hugely obvious. And it's when I remember doing White Bear particularly, I took all of the things that I felt that I hadn't sort of done as well on Retreat, and really threw them into White Bear to make something that, I think is probably my favourite piece of work that I've done out of all the things I've done. It's still White Bear sort of stands out for me, just because I think it was sort of, for me, kind of creatively successful. It sort of achieved, what I set out to do with it and what everybody wanted from it.
Yeah.
And so that sort of stands out as like a moment of going, oh, great, and it's also fun because I'd made this indie film and toiled over it for quite a long time, and it had these stars in it, and it did okay. I remember standing on the stage of the Alamo Drafthouse in Texas, and introducing my film and thinking, this is amazing, right? But the film sort of like, and I took my parents to see it at the cinema, and that that was cool. I did all of those things with it, But then it's sort of like, then you're like, okay, what now? And then I remember when I did sort of White Bear, and it was when trending on Twitter mattered, and when with the reviews, it got great reviews, and it sort of opened up this other kind of world, and I realised that was sort of where it was at, at that point, and just sort of followed that journey,
Yeah. And I must say that it is a really good episode. I watched it over the weekend in preparation to talk to you. So if you've got Netflix, definitely give it a watch. Great episode. I hope that was useful. If you are interested in a career in television as a director and you want to listen to another episode, I suggest you check out How to Turn a Short Film into a Television Career with Jamie Donoghue. He made a short film which then got Oscar nominated, and then he went on to become a television director working on big shows like The Last Kingdom and Doctor Who. See you on the next one.